Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Unauthorized Disclosure podcast. I'm Kevin Gostola, joined by Rania Kalik. Hey Rania.
Hey Kevin.
And as you can see, our guest this week is Jordan Chariton, or if you're listening, Jordan Chariton, the host of Status Coup, the co-founder of Status Coup, is joining us for this broadcast. So thank you, Jordan.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And bear with me. I think I've got the connection worked out, but I did just move. So if something happens with the internet, Rania, I will come back to continue the recording. But we've been wanting to have you on for various reasons, but it's impossible for us to go a week without us talking about censorship at YouTube and throughout the different social media platforms. And we know that you've been impacted. And I pulled some of the tweets that are out there that you've sent, which I'd like to just take a moment to put up on the screen here and show for people who may not be familiar with what you've gone through. So here's the first one that we'll stick up on the screen. And for those who are listening, it says after YouTube or Team YouTube has taken down 710 reporting videos from Status Coup of Trump supporters' bogus election fraud claims, which we challenge. They're now warning us we'll get a strike and a week ban if more are found. YouTube is really trying to push us off the platform. Another one that you have, another tweet that you sent out was one that involved this instance of censorship where it said YouTube's removed another Status Coup vid citing harassment and cyberbullying. And I emphasize the quotes around harassment and cyberbullying. This is a disgrace. YouTube creators, this video is a compilation of hard-hitting 2020 reporting on Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, interviews with Elon, Rashida Tlaib, Pramila Jayapal, etc. Fix it. So these are members of Congress, and videos were taken down. And then one more, and we'll let you share your thoughts about how things are going right now. So this video at so this screenshot here. Hey, Team YouTube creators, how is it that Status Coup with 118,000 subscribers, I assume you have even more now, has 60 live viewers after nearly 10 minutes of a live stream and the same amount of likes to viewers? It seems our subscribers, nor anyone really, are getting our feed. These numbers have been all week during that particular week. That was from back in May. So these are all from the past 6 months. This is what you've been dealing with. And we'd like to hear from you about how you're navigating all of this censorship.
We're kind of, I don't want to sound dire, but it's definitely treading water at the moment. It actually, for us, started in 2018, because I think a lot of people think it's only the algorithm that is censoring. I think there's ample evidence that there's also human beings at YouTube that target specific channels, and there's human moderation as well. I mean, we started the channel in about March 2018, and right away we were growing pretty quickly. We grew, I think, almost 7,000 subscribers in like 2 weeks, which is pretty good. And I think a lot of that was, people finding me that might have watched at the Young Turks when I was there. And I did a video on YouTube. I did a video criticizing YouTube. And all of a sudden, like the chart showed, views fell off the cliff, subscriber growth fell off the cliff. And that was in 2018, only a few weeks after we started. Just randomly, we were growing. I do a video criticizing YouTube, falls off a cliff. And basically, ever since, it's really been this kind of sugar high growth. What I mean by that is we'll have some home runs, a lot of stuff when we were on the campaign trail, or, January 6th, my cameraman had the first live stream live from the Capitol, got amazing footage, which has been picked up by a lot of different outlets. But if it's not like a breaking news situation, it seems YouTube essentially, and their CEO has just openly admitted it, is essentially hiding my channel, other channels, whatever, calling it borderline content. The YouTube CEO just kind of openly bragged about trying to that it's more difficult. It is going to be more difficult for quote newer channels, independent channels, and it's really, in our case, frustrating. I respect everybody in progressive independent media, commentators, this and that, but for us, we go out in the field. For example, I was just live at the Amazon warehouse in Staten Island the other day. They literally built a fence around the warehouse to block union organizers that are trying to unionize there. And literally we're live to, I think, like 250 people with a channel of 118,000 subscribers. So number one, it's frustrating and a real challenge for us because we can't really grow that way. We can't really continue to pay everybody if we're not reaching new viewers. But secondly, whatever the movement is, how do you grow a progressive movement, an anti-war movement, anti-capitalist, climate, whatever, if nobody knows what's going on? I mean, we have 118,000 subscribers. We went live the other day to 250 people from the Amazon warehouse. So we're trying to do different things. We just launched a Substack and are doing more written pieces there. We're talking to, some different outlets about possibly putting our content on those outlets. But unfortunately, YouTube, for better or worse, is where most digital users go. And they're really, it should be a scandal. It really should be a scandal, but it's unfortunately just been accepted that they're doing this to channels like ours.
So, it's really surprising because you mentioned was it the YouTube CEO or the Google CEO? I was trying to find it, but I know that there was like a conversation back and forth. And in that conversation, I think it was the YouTube CEO explicitly said, we are basically like suppressing political content that isn't what they consider to be credible news agencies.
Yeah.
I actually have this clip. I don't know if you wanted me to play this, Rania, or not.
Yeah, if you have it, because I was just looking for it and I couldn't find it. So please.
This is with Susan Wojcicki at the Global Technology Governance Summit in 2021, I think.
But I would say the con of potentially some of these changes, because as you pointed out, every change has some downside, is it may be harder in some cases for channels maybe who are getting started or smaller to be able to be visible when there is a major event or when people are looking at something that is science or news related. But I would say that that's a trade-off that we've made because we've realized that it's really, really important. So we learned this lesson the hard way. So when we had the Las Vegas shooting, unfortunately, there were a lot of people who were uploading content that was not factual, that was not correct. And it's much easier to just make up content and post it from your basement than it is to actually go to the site and to be able to report and have high quality journalistic reporting. And so that was just an example of what happens if you don't have that kind of ranking. So sure, we want to enable citizen journalism and other people to be able to report and other people to be able to share information in new channels. But when we're dealing with a sensitive topic, we have to have that information coming from authoritative sources so that the right and accurate information is viewed by our users first.
But yeah, that to me shows that there's obviously manipulation going on, and it's really disturbing. And I think obviously that's what's affecting your channel. And I've looked at the numbers on your channel, and a channel that has, I think you have 118,000. Right? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Subscribers should definitely have more than 60 people watching a live stream. So the only way that there would only be 60 people is if your channel is not getting fed into the YouTube algorithm for people to see that you've gone live who follow you. So yeah, it's straight up you are being targeted. And it's not just your channel, it's others too. I mean, we all know it's harder to grow on YouTube now, and you're starting to see something, similar happen on other social media platforms, and it's all targeting political content. I don't know if it's the same segment or the same interview that YouTube CEO said this, but she also said it probably was during that because it was during a conversation back and forth. she also said that they actually like for creators, for people who want to, you know, create comedy or like a cooking show, you can still grow organically. But for political content, that's just not the case.
Right.
So, yeah.
I think people need to think about it this way. You know, everybody has different views now. There's a lot of people who are a little peeved at Bernie Sanders. But if you think back to 2016, right? YouTube at that point was not doing this. Okay. There was not the suppression, there was not censorship, demonetizing immediately when you upload a video. Bernie Sanders' campaign and that whole movement would have not taken off without independent media, social media, and actually being seen. We know that the corporate outlets were ignoring it and showing, you know, empty podiums of Donald Trump. But a huge reason Bernie's campaign took off, volunteers, donations, you know, just exploding and gaining momentum was back then the Young Turks, other platforms actually covering it. And, you know, I was on the road covering a lot of those rallies, and they were taking off on YouTube because they weren't throttling. If it was today, I don't know if that would be the case. If this was, you know, let's say maybe not Bernie, but a different campaign, because it's not a guarantee people would see it. I mean, Facebook is horrible with this. We don't even bother anymore. Twitter, I mean, I think I have 116,000 Twitter followers. I've been suppressed on Twitter for 2-3 years. I think spoke with an expert who told me they're deprioritizing my tweets. So it's a scandal, but it's also dangerous because it's an information war, basically. It's an information war to try and stuff in people's feeds. I mean, if you look at the news tab in YouTube, the top trending things, or the trending tab, it's like Bloomberg and MSNBC and CNN. I mean, CNN clips used to get a couple thousand views. Now they're getting hundreds of thousands, if not millions of views.
Right.
I don't think people suddenly are jonesing for Wolf Blitzer. It's just all they're being fed. And it's gotten to the point now where literally we have moderators in our chat who know when a live stream is coming that don't see when we've gone live. I mean,
Yeah.
So I think, you know, some channels are affected more than others, but I've been saying for a long time, I think too many independent creators are still in the old mentality of like kind of living on your own island and doing things separately. I think there needs to be a lot more collaboration among independent outlets. I think, frankly, you know, possibly a network. Doesn't mean individuals can't keep their own brands and, you know, separate Patreons or whatever. But at this point, I think it's only going to get worse because it's essentially been accepted that they're doing this, and it's hurting us, obviously, but more importantly, it's hurting communities that already are desperate for coverage. Whether it's, you know, the Amazon workers. You know, I've been covering Flint for many years. That stuff's not being seen as much as it used to. These are already stories that aren't covered in corporate media. So then you're going to bury it in the few places that do cover it. It's very dangerous for a so-called democracy.
You know, it's kind of like informational dictatorship. Like, where we like to think we live in this country, like, oh yeah, we're not like these other places that have all these state-run TV channels. We have all these different channels and anyone can have an outlet. But what does that really mean when CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News get to cheat and get to be put at the front of the line and get millions of views because that's what's promoted into everyone's feed? Like, even if I don't follow these channels and they still get promoted into my feed. And we know this is deliberate because you have all of these tech giants, whether it's Google or Twitter or Facebook, being advised by these US government-funded think tanks. I mean, the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensics Lab advises all of these tech giants on what constitutes disinformation and what constitutes credible news agencies. Who funds the Atlantic Council? Like every weapons company that you can name. As well as the US State Department and NATO. And so they're, you know, in this way, it's like this loophole middleman, right? Because the US government isn't supposed to be regulating speech. But because these private tech giants are private companies, they're allowed to regulate speech. So what does that mean if US government funded advisors are telling them what's good and bad speech? I mean, it's just government speech regulation through a middleman.
Absolutely. And I also think a lot of people don't realize this, but we always talk about the revolving door, like politicians then become lobbyists, politicians go work on Wall Street. A lot of these Silicon Valley companies are like old Democratic and Republican Party hands. I mean,
Yeah.
executives at Facebook used to work for like the DCCC. Twitter's a communications executive with Twitter used to work for Vice President Harris. And all of these companies, I mean, Chuck Schumer gets the most money of anybody from Facebook. His daughter, I don't know if she still works there, but used to work at Facebook. So, you know, it's really insidious, and it's like all these other special interests that have bought our government. Silicon Valley is just pouring money in to our government. You got Amazon lobbying for contracts and getting contracts with the Pentagon and the CIA. So essentially, you have quote unquote private companies that are very much in bed with the government. And you also have YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. It's just kind of fed into the tribalism. I mean, Democratic politicians are cheering on, getting rid of these Republicans and far right people off these social media platforms, and then kind of quietly ignoring, the collateral damage, which is us. And I don't really particularly think they care about, the suppression of independent sources, because those independent sources are usually covering them critically. So to me, and I would like to see this argument advanced by some politicians. Bottom line, these platforms are saying they're platforms, not publishers, but everything they're doing is editorial decisions. Well, I mean, the CEO that you played her clip, they are making editorial decisions about what is trustworthy, what is authoritative, what is borderline, what is fact-based, what is not. That's not just a passive platform that's simply we're a platform and, it goes far beyond like terms of service. It is editorial decision making, but pushing and spending probably billions of dollars a year lobbying the government so that they're not regulated as a public utility. And they should be, because they are making the same exact editorial decisions that cable news stations make, the New York Times make. And essentially, another part of it, the sites that they are elevating as authoritative routinely get stories wrong. Russiagate, Iraq. I mean, you name it. CNN, Fox News, they refer to as one of their authoritative sources. But those channels are not at all affected. They are being elevated and pushed through the feed. I also think another part of this, real quick, YouTube put all its apples in trying YouTube TV. They basically wanted to become like a cable news station online. So for that, they had to make deals with all these corporate channels from CNN, MSNBC, ESPN, whatever, so that they could carry those channels on YouTube TV. Well, if you're trying to push YouTube TV and that's your big thing, then you're probably going to favor these mainstream corporate outlets. And it's really a shame, because for those old enough to remember, I mean, YouTube, when it started, literally meant YouTube. Like anybody could thrive just based on, whatever. Are you interesting? Is your topics good? Are you covering a niche that people are interested in? Anybody could thrive. But like, look at Kyle Kalinske, for example. He does great work. He started long before they started doing this stuff. If he started in, let's say, 2018 when we started, he'd probably be in the same position as us.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So it's really not
stuck. He'd be stuck at a few 40,000 followers or something, and just his videos would definitely not be getting the amount of views. I mean, even now, the amount of views his videos get don't compare to the amount of people following him. His follower count hasn't grown. But there are some people who are able to get around it somehow. Kyle is still quite successful in literally any venture that he does, I guess, outside of his show. Him and Crystal have this podcast that, does quite well. So I'm not sure what gets you on the list. Like,
So that's
not everyone's on it.
that's to me a bit of a red herring, and I'll tell you why. And I want to be clear, this is not to take anything away from Kyle or Crystal, because I really think they do great work. But for example, Crystal and Sagar, they just left the Hill. They launched a new YouTube channel. I think they already have like 80,000 subscribers and they haven't even done a show yet. But a big part of that is because they were on this corporate channel that was recommended nonstop and Crystal has openly acknowledged this, that they were not being harmed by YouTube. So if you kind of have that head start, it doesn't mean they weren't doing great content. It just means that content.
Also,
yeah.
It also probably helps to have Sagar is like a fellow at the Hudson Institute. That's pretty much as mainstream as you can possibly get.
Right.
It's like the Hudson Institute is like a neocon think tank that is, I think Mike Pompeo is like the head of it now after leaving the State Department under Trump. So, I guess also it's not like there's two radical leftists starting a channel. Sagar is very much establishment, despite his anti-establishment persona. So it probably helps to have a Republican friend sitting at the table with you.
Well, it also helps
at a DC think tank.
It also helps to have, and again, I really like Crystal, Sagar.
No, so do I. And I have to say, her and Kyle had me on to talk about Palestine. So, she's definitely somebody who, despite having access to a mainstream channel and despite being on a mainstream channel, has certainly offered that platform to people who might otherwise not get it. Mm-hmm. That said, there's still a reason why, somebody like her wouldn't be harmed. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, also, there's just advantages that people don't even realize when you're with The Hill, that your videos are also being embedded into articles on thehill.com, which is heavily trafficked. So that's getting you traffic. You mentioned Kyle, Jimmy to a lesser degree. Kyle, I don't know when he started, but I think over a decade ago. So he already had the opportunity. He's great to build that large audience so that when YouTube pulled the lever, it's affecting him, but he already had, hundreds of thousands of subscribers. So it doesn't affect him the same way it would smaller channels that, only have, 100,000 or so. So that's in part why he has that large audience already. So then if he starts a podcast, he's able to promote that podcast to his 900,000 or whatever subscribers. So it's not like, to me, it's not a level playing field. At the end of the day, a lot of these shows are doing similar topics, yet one show's getting 100,000 views and another one with the same topic is getting, 20,000. Right now there are literally channels that are new. One comes to mind called The Vanguard, which I like those two guys. They've been doing great work. I think they have 12,000 subscribers. They're literally getting more live viewers than Status Coup with 118,000 subscribers.
That's wild. Yeah, you're on a list.
I'm totally happy for them, but that makes no sense. And I have I have a running email chain with YouTube, and it's just bumper sticker copied and paste bullshit that doesn't make any sense. So it kind of gets to a point where even the people that are a lot bigger right now, kind of what I've said in private conversations is it might not be affecting you the same way it's affecting us, but they have the pattern is they're escalating this. It seems like, I don't know, every 6 months, or if there's a big news event that creates controversy, January 6th, Trump's election fraud claims, COVID, they use those instances to pull the lever more. So why do we think we're not coming to a day that they might just get rid of certain channels altogether? So I think certain channels, that's why I'm saying, and I've spoken with people privately, why don't we all have a meeting and discuss some type of, network? Because to me, I think there's an appetite out there, even if it was, $10 to $20 a month for kind of like a buffet of a lot of different options. That doesn't mean you can't support separately certain channels. To me, I think that's the only real way in the long term to succeed.
Yeah, I think you're right, and you're onto something about media. solidarity, and I'll sort of avoid that subject for the time being to elevate what you've been doing, because I think there's a lot of live streamers out there that do their work. They mostly do their work from their home. I applaud you for being one of the few successful live streaming operations that also has a component of traveling to sites consistently and talking to people who are on the ground. I do think, what YouTube is concerned about is not something that merits censorship, but there are a lot of people who just pretend to be experts and have successful streaming channels. And that has no bearing on your ideology. I mean, anyone of any ideological stripe can just fabricate and make up nonsense. And if they accumulate a following, they're going to do fairly well. So, I'd like you to talk a bit about the issue of accountability and share with us some of your experience specifically with YouTube about what you do if you get a strike against you, or if they complain and say that you've done something that they do not like. How do you manage that, especially as what you're describing, they're not very responsive. They just give you boilerplate information. What does YouTube expect of creators, and is there even any way for creators to resolve these issues? I only have a very limited amount of experience, but even I have posted videos to the Shadowproof YouTube account I have, which we don't use to the extent that you do. I wouldn't consider it a serious YouTube channel, but to the extent that we've used it to push out some video content, to do some interviews and post, I've had things that were required or designated for limited monetization simply because we talked about war or war crimes. And so what if I want to challenge that with YouTube? What does anybody begin to do to have any form of due process?
Good luck. That's all I have to say. I'll give you guys an example. Obviously, January 6th, my cameraman was down at the Capitol. I think he was one of the first people live. He literally, risked his life. I don't think that's an exaggeration. When you're in those situations, to be honest, you don't really know, like, are bullets coming next? What's coming? Because it was a really, really dangerous situation. He had like cracked ribs for 2 weeks. He got that footage that CNN and everybody else has used of the camera of the police officer's head being rammed into the door in that corridor. So we had like almost 30,000 live viewers, which is amazing for us. Overall, we had, I believe, 250, 300,000 views on that. And again, we got requests from all the outlets, both domestic and foreign, for that footage. And then all of a sudden, it's taken down by YouTube. There's no person to talk. There's no warning. There's no, please add this to the video or, something like that. It was just taken down while we had people reaching out to us to license it. So thankfully we had already downloaded it, for that very reason, in case YouTube took it down. But they took it down. We appealed it. It's just an automated button to appeal. We rallied the troops on social media. In a lot of cases, the few times we've been able to get YouTube to reinstate a video is when we've tweeted and just mass direct messaged a million people to share it. And I guess YouTube gets shamed enough and then they respond. But around the same time they took down our original January 6th footage, they started taking down around 8 to 10 videos of my cameraman or me in the field interviewing Trump supporters who were pushing the election fraud claim, which we were challenging them on. So literally we were doing pretty much the exact same thing. CNN has done some segments where a reporter's out at these Trump events or Stop the Steal events, and the CNN reporter is interviewing Trump supporters who are spewing this nonsense. And I if you want to say challenging them, but those clips were okay. Our clips were taken down and under the bumper sticker, advancing false claims of election fraud, despite the fact that we were challenging the claims. And it gets to a point where, what do you do if you're an in the field reporting unit. I mean, a big part of what we do is actually going out there. It costs us on average, let's say I want to go with my cameraman, I don't know, we want to do an eviction tour, a road trip right now where we go out and interview people facing eviction, who have their unemployment being taken away, just tough economic times during the pandemic. Well, that's going to cost anywhere from like $2 to $3 grand for my cameraman, gas, food, additional expenses. We often have to get more equipment. Well, if A, we're already being suppressed, but B, I don't know what's permissible anymore on YouTube. I mean, we've had live streams taken down while we're live. My cameraman from a gun rights rally, which was frankly tame. So yeah, they're literally taking stuff down with no one to talk to at the time. You appeal it. Oftentimes they'll get back to the appeal weeks later. And it really is at a point like that January 6th footage, it's so warped. The footage was picked up by CNN, NBC, ABC, CBS, BBC, Showtime, a lot of different platforms. Documentary filmmakers are reaching out for us. And the places we licensed it to put it on YouTube, fine. But the original source has it taken down. So really the only thing you could do, and most people don't have this benefit, is tweet it, try to get a lot of action on the tweet, retweets, all that. Fortunately, we have a lot of people that are nice enough to share it. I have a decent following, but for the channels that don't, you're kind of SOL, honestly, if they start taking things down. And it's not just what they take down. I mean, literally, YouTube, if you have the word Palestine in the headline, they're going to suppress it. Amazon, my streams have been suppressed. Anything on Amazon for months. COVID suppressed. So COVID suppressed. So it's like you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. And that's why for us, we're trying to kind of spread our wings to Substack. We're talking to one platform about possibly doing an exclusive broadcast for them once a week, because I don't, YouTube right now is making it so it doesn't really matter if you choose the right topics. It doesn't matter if you go to cover a great story that the masses would want to know about. YouTube is making it so people aren't seeing it.
So are you enjoying listening to the show? You should be. And if you are, you'll want access to our premium content, which you can find at Rockfin. Kevin, tell them about Rockfin.
Yes, we're up on rockfin.com. You can find us there at this URL, rockfin.com/unauthorized-dis. And this channel is where we're going to get away from the demonetization that is happening on YouTube. We think it's going to allow us to grow our show and bring in new subscribers like you, people who are coming to this show for the first time, or maybe you haven't become subscribers yet and you were looking for an opportunity. And here, if you come and subscribe to our show at Rockfin, you won't just get access to us, you'll get access to other people who are making shows in the same space politically as us. People like Lee Camp, Graham Elwood, Jackson Hinkle, Richard Medhurst, Ron Placone, as well as Jimmy Dore. And some of these people have been guests on Unauthorized Disclosure.
So join us on Rockfin, subscribe, get access to our premium content, and you can hear all those other cool people too. Yeah, YouTube is basically taking an audience away from people who aren't CNN. That's all it's about. It's like they just want to prioritize corporate media. That's it. Like corporate media, when we think about 10 years ago even, was dying. Do you remember? Like, nobody was watching CNN and MSNBC anymore and Fox News. They were doing terrible on YouTube. I remember like you mentioned earlier, they'd get like a couple thousand views on a video. That is how it was. And then almost overnight, they just took over. Like, it's like YouTube, all of these platforms that started out as like giving everybody a microphone are now just dominating, including Twitter. I mean, you mentioned your Twitter account. Like my Twitter account barely grows anymore. It just kind of stopped.
Yep.
Like it's really weird. People, I mean, it's been, especially since January 6th, I think there's been a dramatic strategy put in place to like to like prioritize everything mainstream, even more so since January 6th, since they like are convinced that it's because of social media that happened. So I don't know if you've noticed it, but I don't know, my Twitter account since January 6th like barely grows.
My Twitter account, since I got canned by the Young Turks, barely grows.
Well, that's
And
another thing is like the Young Turks. This is not, and I'm not doing this to trash talk or anything. This is more like there are outlets like the Young Turks that kind of like portray themselves as anti-establishment and progressive, but they're also part of that corporate media ecosystem. They just happen to be online only, but they are, and so they don't get suppressed. Like they don't get suppressed at all, from what I can tell. They are treated very much like MSNBC might be treated online, from what I can
no, I
see.
mean, I remember when I was there, Jank had a direct line to YouTube because TYT
They're
was
so big, yeah.
basically the original, breakthrough news and politics show on YouTube. So
Yeah.
they had a direct line. They had a party, I think, at YouTube when they hit 1 billion views. So yeah, they definitely have a direct line. They stopped cursing at some point on the show. I don't know for sure.
They also attack the left like a lot.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like
We could do
especially
a whole
recently, like
podcast
there was
on
that crazy clip of them just like
Yeah.
going off about Aaron Mate, like totally unprovoked.
Yep.
Just like accusing Aaron Mate of like basically just libelous claims he's paid by Russia, which I was pretty shocked by. But I mean, it speaks to something. Like it speaks to a sort of gatekeeping that like it's a kind of like if you're playing the gatekeeper role, then you're okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, to me, what's really the most troubling about it is YouTube's algorithm, I believe, also favors the kind of the similar hot topics that get pushed on cable news. So, like, honestly, with Status Coup, if I would have just done, 50 videos on Trump, Russiagate, Stormy Daniels, whatever stuff cable news was covering for the last 3 years, probably over 1 million subscribers, frankly. And CNN, TYT, for example, I think it was genuine. I think Jank really just had Trump derangement syndrome. But I also think they saw that their clips on Trump and other things were doing really well. I mean, they were losing half their existing audience, but it was still getting views from wider YouTube. So, and also, and when I was there, they desperately wanted like mainstream credibility and to be taken seriously by these mainstream outlets, which I said, why do we care what the Washington Post thinks of us when I was there? So yeah, I mean, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. And I like rarely covered Trump, not because I didn't think he was dangerous, but because I didn't really think, what can I add that's not being covered by a gazillion people right now? Everybody's covering the same thing. So we covered niche areas that nobody else was covering. But the truth is, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, all these platforms have made it so covering that you're punished really on these platforms for covering different things. I'm sure Kevin knows from covering the Assange trial that stuff's not going to go viral. I mean, you'll get respect for doing it, but it's not going to go viral. And covering Flint, we've grown our paid membership for covering those stories, but those videos don't typically do well because it's not in YouTube's interest to actually show real injustice, real corruption, real suffering. It's in their interest, like Facebook, to keep people on for as long as possible by just feeding infotainment and sensationalism.
Well, one thing that these platforms can't stop are the personalities that do command large followings. So if someone like, and this is a specific example, if Glenn Greenwald or Edward Snowden retweets your Julian Assange trial coverage, CNN and MSNBC and YouTube and all of those other places are powerless to stop the spread of that reporting. It's going to organically receive eyeballs, and that's the only time that I've seen my account grow substantively in the last 2 to 3 years. But for you, I want to ask you, I have a couple media questions, and maybe I don't get to both of them before we have to wrap. But the first one I have is an opinion I've developed from doing this work on Julian Assange's case. But I'd like to ask you, because I'm really interested in how an independent media creator navigates this dilemma. So what we're talking about with YouTube is also an issue of corporate or establishment media. It's an issue of legacy media culture, the same kinds of problems that led Crystal Ball and Sagar to decide that they want to have their own show. But how do you make the decision about what amount of time you want to spend critiquing media and bashing the media versus just using your platform to do this independent work? And if you don't understand the question I'm asking, I guess what I'm trying to get at is we all have a finite amount of time in our lives, and I find myself consistently dealing with this tension of, do I put together a critique of something on CNN or MSNBC or the lack of coverage of something versus do I just go do that coverage myself because I have the ability to do it and I can do it better than any corporate media outlet?
Yeah, I mean, keeping it real, there's periods now just because of what we're talking about where I have to say, screw it. I need something that's going to click and get people. Yeah. For example, yesterday I had, Jimmy on, which was a huge benefit. We've been basically strangled to death. I was actually on my honeymoon recently, and Jen, my co-founder, was, doing the daily live streams. She was covering the Israel-Palestine, the latest carpet bombing by Israel on Gaza. And we were strangled to death. Literally, our views fell off a cliff during that. I wonder why. So, I just put a headline, I fully admit it, that was kind of just clickbait. I think it was like, Jimmy Dore live, squad surrender, demolition TYT. And I typically don't do that, but you need something at certain points to kind of just get people. I mean, obviously Jimmy was the draw that got people, but so I tend to, I see a lot of channels now, I'm sure you guys see it too, that generally it's just a lot of like clicky headlines about this person attacks this person, or like, Glenn, stuff about like personalities and conflict. A lot of channels literally do like 5 to 10 videos just bashing TYT. It's not really like much substance. It's mostly just conflict driven, and kind of hot takes driven, and they're getting clicks for it. So, so be it. I try to stay away from that because my interest is more in investigative stories. My interest is more in kind of human suffering, human, corruption stories. And, a lot of times with that, that's not going, like we talked about, that's not going to be the clickiest stories. But I think over time, we are on the side of doing more investigative stuff, because ultimately that's what is going to grow your paid support down the road, mixed with, kind of covering news of the day. So I tend to not do like a ton of media criticism, but, sometimes if something's like beyond egregious, I'll go after like Morning Joe or Rachel Maddow or whatever. But I tend to err on the side of just focusing mostly on stories that people aren't covering. If there's a media criticism that I could do and weave in, new information about something else, I tend to do that. But yeah, I think there's more and more channels that are basically not providing much other than clickbaity, TYT's garbage, or, Glenn Greenwald attacked by this, and not really adding anything or introducing new information. I think Jimmy, for example, he gets a lot of criticism, obviously, but he also covers things other people don't, and covers stories other people don't. Not everybody likes the way he does it. So for us, it is a balance. And sometimes we do videos, frankly, just to get things moving around this suppression. But most of the time, I kind of stay away from like focusing on how bad CNN is or MSNBC is, unless it's just too good to ignore.
It's just like lazy and easy.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, you know what I mean? And I think you make a really good point. This stuff is incentivized. So if the algorithm is incentivizing this kind of cheap, lazy, and again, I'm not trying to like offend anyone who does this. I just think it's like easy. And if that's what's being incentivized, is this kind of easy, substanceless, like, you know, Ben Shapiro said this, you know, like, let's make fun of him kind of stuff. If that's what's being incentivized, that's what gets you views. And if your livelihood depends on YouTube, because you're dependent on the ad money or something, or the number of subscribers you have, then you're incentivized to go in a direction of the infotainment you mentioned. Like, it's being incentivized. And that, it's like all of these ways make it so that they don't actually have to delete accounts.
Right.
Like,
And I think, and personally for me, and again, I'm not trying to do this to like bash TYT, but I will use TYT as an example. I think a major issue with progressive media is, and this isn't only because it's mostly us they're ignoring, but like progressive media who care about these policies oftentimes are kind of covering news of the day, but not elevating real reporting. What I mean by that, like when I was at TYT, I'd be at Flint, I'd be at Standing Rock, I'd be covering other water issues or this and that, like in the field, and they were paying for it, yet it was pulling teeth to get them to cover it on the show. Literally, I mean, I had wars with Cenk because they would not show my stuff on the show. I didn't want them to show it on the show, like, so I could grow my Twitter following. I wanted to show them on the show it on the show because it was important stories that no one else was covering. I was like, from a business perspective, it could help you grow, but they wouldn't show it. Same thing with Status Coup. I mean, I won't name names, but like when we've been in Flint, when we've been covering Black Lives Matter protests on the ground, when we've been covering pipeline fights, when we were in Seattle covering like the homelessness explosion because of Jeff Bezos, by the way, and we would send it to different channels, not even saying like have us as a guest, but like, hey, if you want to cover this, show our footage, react to it, and they don't do it. So it kind of like, that's what I mean by like lack of collaboration. And it's not just us. I mean, there are some other channels that occasionally do like in the field stuff. Like Crystal should be reacting to that stuff. Kyle should be reacting to that stuff. Jimmy should be reacting to that stuff. You know, they don't. It's not like them saying it's not like them saying go subscribe to this channel, but it's about actually showing basically putting a face to the policies we don't have.
Right. And that's what I think that goes back to how this is impacting media. Me and Kevin have talked about this before, is the structure of this kind of environment that we have where what goes viral is the infotainment punditry has actually been terrible for journalism. Because unless you can entertain a large audience that you've maybe already grown previously, or that you get to have because you're at a corporate outlet or something, unless you can entertain a large audience, it's like impossible to do journalism, or to just be in the media. And then the other thing is like, instead of elevating experts who might not always be so entertaining, or people on the ground who might not always be so entertaining, right? Because they're not all comedians, you know, that are going to make you laugh. What you also have, and again, this isn't speaking to any individual like deficiency here. It's just what's being incentivized is, and I'm guilty of this too, is you have a situation where different media personalities just end up having each other on their shows. Like, have you noticed that? It's like, it just becomes this circle jerk of like, well, let's get all these big names together and then we'll get a lot of views, which is exactly what happens. But like, at the end of the day, is anybody really learning anything by hearing everybody talk to each other about like that, about stuff they agree with each other about and none of the other stuff? I mean, you can do both, but my point is like, that's what the left media environment has become. It's become more and increasingly in this direction of infotainment versus any sort of journalism or on the ground reporting. And there's a couple outlets that still do the on the ground stuff. I mean, yours is an example. You know, at Breakthrough News, we're trying to do that. Like, I do these really long interviews with people who I think should be given way bigger platforms because they know so much shit. And we do on the ground stuff. But of course, like, you notice what gets more views. Absolutely. And yeah, the stuff that gets more views is definitely the more entertaining. And it's sad, actually. It's actually really sad. And I think it's really devastating for journalism as an industry.
And I also think, because I've seen it, in a pre-YouTube suppression world, actually a lot of these platforms are wrong because you can get high views if you're not being suppressed.
Yeah.
Covering offense outside Amazon to block union busting, covering environmental protests, covering Black Lives Matter protests, interviewing Breonna Taylor's aunt. I mean, all these things we've done over the past year, covering local political races. There is a huge audience online for that. The problem is they're not seeing that content, or they don't know Status Coup exists or Breakthrough News exists. So for example, this isn't to toot my own horn, but like the Young Turks, when I was there, the biggest membership gain they had, paid membership, was when I was at Standing Rock.
Yeah.
So it wasn't because I'm so great. It was because, honestly, they couldn't find it anywhere else. I mean,
Right.
Democracy Now! Was there for a little bit, but overall, I was there longer than anyone else. So it's kind of like actions speak louder than words. Like, oh, wow, they're covering this. I'm going to support this.
Yeah.
So, that's what's missing. And frankly, I'll use one example. And again, I like Crystal and Kyle, but I noticed like they had Vosh on their podcast. And it's kind of like, obviously,
I didn't know who that was until they had. I like randomly that video got pushed into my feed of the interview with him, and I was like, "Who is this guy? He's got like over 200,000 YouTube subscribers. I've never heard of him."
Right, but like I don't know. I kind of find him creepy. But putting that aside, it's
But he
like,
just, like, talks to himself. And
Right.
I'm just like, who is this? Why does he have 250,000 followers? Whatever. Maybe he's great. I don't know. I've never really watched his stuff. I was just like, who is this guy?
I think they basically had him on because like he was critical of Crystal, and maybe that's why they had him on to like hash it out. But it's kind of like, whether it's me, Status Coup, or not, like you have this podcast, you have this platform, so you could have like reporters on, you could be introducing new stories, new information, but you're having some guy on that talks to himself. So, I like them both. I hope this doesn't hurt me getting on their podcast, but it is frustrating. I'm not going to lie. I'm human. It's frustrating when you are doing backbreaking work. Like literally, I've had 2 back surgeries, and you've traveled for 6 years, and you're in the field on, weekends, holidays, all the time. And well, COVID slowed us down, but overall, we're in the field constantly, and you're basically, it's like pulling teeth to even get people in your sandbox to cover it. And I think part of that is it's not easy for everybody to go out in the field. Some people, it's just not their thing, and that's okay. But we all, even as progressives, you kind of get disconnected if you're just in a studio and you don't see things up close. Like before I traveled and covered these stories, like, did I know about Flint and what happened? Yeah. Did I feel it? No, because I had never gone to Flint. I didn't know the people. I didn't see up close the disaster, and I then wasn't able to unpeel the onion of all the corruption. So I think we have a lot of commentators who are great people and they're smarter, this and that, but are kind of focused too much on kind of like the news of the day hot takes, rather than introducing new reporting, new information, and elevating each other. And I would challenge each one. If you do, whether it's Status Coup or other independent reporting, elevating that, it could be good for both, because then those commentators could react to it. And it's not all bad. I mean, Jimmy's had me on when we've broken stories. I went on with Crystal and Sagar a few times. So it does happen occasionally. Humanist Report has had me on for certain stories, but I think we should be elevating each other. They should be elevating Ranya's work, Kevin's work. Kevin did amazing work on the Assange trial and got on some shows, but that stuff, that's why to me, it just makes sense. Maybe it's not a full-blown network, but more collaboration between channels, because it's really at this point going to at a certain point it's going to be a matter of survival, channels lifting each other up.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I know we need to start winding down, concluding. But there's one more topic I'd like to get to very briefly, which is a larger press freedom issue. But I'd like to just ask you about this development that is coming out of California and what this would mean for you if other states were like this. Aaron Cantu, I'm not sure if I'm saying his last name completely correct, but I know that he was targeted as someone who was arrested during the J20 protests, the demonstrations when he was there covering Trump's inauguration. There's a bill going through California's legislature that would require journalists to obtain, quote, authorization from a commanding officer on scene, end quote, to access areas closed by police during a demonstration, march, protest, or rally. It passed. It passed with a vote of 32-2 in the California Senate. And there are groups that are protesting this. Fortunately, we have some journalism groups that are calling attention to what this would mean. But I imagine an outlet like Status Coup, this particularly impacts you. It could disproportionately impact you because you're not a CNN or an MSNBC. When it's broadcast live on air and you get arrested, if you're a CNN anchor, you're able to get bailed out pretty immediately. I don't think that happens for the team at Status Coup. So this could be completely and totally a barrier to your work.
So basically, because this is the first I'm hearing of it, that you have to ask the police permission to film them beating up protesters. Is that it?
Yeah, that sounds like what they're setting up is that they don't like that there are all these journalists at these Black Lives Matter protests that they can't control. So they want to put them on a list of authorized journalists. But what if they don't recognize that you're a journalist? I mean, obviously, I've dealt with this personally because they won't recognize that Julian Assange is a journalist. So if Julian Assange shows up to a protest, if he was free, are they going to allow him on the list? Are they going to allow you on a list? Are they going to allow someone who works for you who just, are they going to allow citizen? I mean, again, like this goes back to the issue of people not recognizing that journalism is actually an act. You can't really certify who is and is not a journalist. Anybody can engage in journalism in this country and anywhere around the world.
Yeah, first of all, that's extremely dangerous. Thank you for bringing it up. I'm going to look into it after this. That's extremely dangerous. Police don't need more power. Police do not, there's nothing in our Constitution or the First Amendment that allows police or government to dictate who is and who is not a journalist. Obviously, if you are, you could tell if somebody's a protester, kind of trying to have it both ways, who's a journalist, but protesting also. But it's not that hard to see who's a journalist. They typically have a camera or notepad or, filming with their phone, narrating, whatever. But things should be moving less power to the police, not more power to the police. And this also goes to a broader problem, which I doubt we have much time to talk about. Part of the reason that's probably going through in California, let's see how much those politicians get from the big police unions in California, because the police unions in New York flood Governor Cuomo and other lawmakers with money. That is obscene. It's dangerous. It would be extremely more suppression for Status Coup, because you think they're going to put us on the approved list. Their police departments are already surveilling media outlets. For example, it came out in North Carolina that police were monitoring Ford Fisher's live stream of the Andrew Brown protests. I know for a fact that Standing Rock, I was being monitored with the Young Turks. I know I've been monitored in Flint by police and government. So it is extremely dangerous and unacceptable of any list. If police don't like that journalists are covering their Black Lives Matter protests, then maybe they should just, behave like, reasonable law enforcement, let protesters protest and not break the law and, attack protesters. If they didn't do that, there would be no problem with how many journalists there are. So I think that's really concerning, and I'll definitely be covering that.
I was trying to wind down the show before Rania had to leave. I was hoping she could sign off with us, but she had to bounce. I only want to take a few more minutes, but just so I get more details out related to what's going on with this bill. And also, since you're going to follow up, I think it's useful for you to just get this information here. It was an amendment to a bill that was actually supported by journalist organizations, and I think it was even supported by a media guild, but they're now opponents of it because what I'm describing to you was a last-minute amendment that was added to this bill. And it was originally introduced. It was supposed to extend state protections for journalists working in disaster areas so that they applied to journalists covering civil disturbances. That's their word, not mine. But an amendment was added by the Appropriations Committee on May 20th, 2021, that would require journalists to seek permission of a police commander to enter closed areas around protests, which this coalition describes as a hurdle that doesn't currently exist under state law. This is a clear attempt to hobble the bill. Journalists should not need permission from a police commander to cover protests, just as law enforcement issued press credentials should not be required in order for journalists to exercise their First Amendment rights in a public forum. So it's good that there are people out there in California, and these organizations are actually calling attention to this. The last thing I'll say, just because we are on an uneven playing field, we have the legacy media or the establishment media. They have their own set of press freedom issues that impact them. And then we have our own, and it's not always that they actually care about the impact or this kinds of press freedom issues that we're dealing with. And it's also not always the case that what are press freedom issues for them are press freedom issues for us. There are things that they'll complain about that it's hard to have solidarity with them over, because it just doesn't really make a difference to us. Like, I don't really care if you're banned from the White House briefing room because Donald Trump took your credential and tore it up and bounced you from the room, because I think you're just in a room with someone who's paid to lie to you, and you should be getting out and going to different places, and you shouldn't sit there trying to trick someone who's a paid liar into giving you an answer that you want every single day of your professional career, which is what a lot of correspondents end up trapped in having to do. And I guess that leads into the last thing I wanted to raise as I conclude with you, and you can give any final comments you want on anything we've discussed in this show. There are these notifications that have been given to the Washington Post, CNN, and New York Times over the last month that notify them that the Trump administration seized their phone records of reporters, and they were the targets of a leak investigation. We don't see any criminal cases brought. It didn't result in prosecutions, but this absolutely infringed upon their press freedom rights. But then the problem that I have as an independent journalist is building solidarity for them, because those people who were targeted by the Trump administration and those same people who have been targeted by the Obama administration and the Bush administration before do not have any solidarity for us when we're targeted. And so you tell people who follow your work that you care about this issue, and they don't understand why you care about its seriousness, because those people are never going to be on your side.
Oh, I mean, I was arrested in 2017 covering Black Lives Matter protests in St. Louis. I think I spent 16 or 17 hours in jail overnight. And when I got out, I couldn't get any corporate outlet to cover it. Brian Stelter with CNN literally said to me, yeah, that's not something I'd cover on reliable sources. We tend to focus more on mainstream outlets. So yeah, corporate outlets, if a CNN reporter is arrested, they'll run promos. And by the way, that CNN reporter who was arrested didn't spend any actual time in jail. They'll run promos. It'll be on their shows, this and that. If independent journalists, not only if they're arrested, but are beaten up. Our cameraman in Minneapolis covering the Dante Wright protests, he showed that police were literally stopping journalists, mostly independent, and storing their information in an app. God knows where that information was going, possibly to federal agencies too. They didn't cover it. So yeah, no, it's there is a selective outrage among corporate journalists. They seem to be aghast if their people in their fellow club are targeted, arrested, harassed, beaten up. But if journalists that aren't, I guess, part of their club, i.e., mainstream, sorry, we can't fit that in. And that's dangerous because journalism is journalism. Doesn't, whether you're CNN or not. I don't have a ton of respect for those journalists because I think they mostly are stenographers for the powerful, but they should be elevating because they know they see on social media when other journalists that are not part of mainstream outlets are being harassed or attacked, but they don't say anything about it. And same thing with Julian Assange. A lot of these same journalists love Julian Assange in 2010, 2011, 2012, and then attacked him as a Russian agent years later. So a lot of them are just partisan hacks, and a lot of them are essentially just kind of elitists in New York and DC that kind of just stick with their own club.
Well, yeah, and it's like I'll conclude with this point, which is they are essentially controlled opposition until the people in power no longer want you in the controlled opposition.
Yeah.
And if the game changes, what do you do? Because at that point, you might not be able to get solidarity if you've just been completely against anyone who was independent and had a conscience for your entire career. So how
Yeah.
do you take somebody seriously who is cast out of that club? And if it's unjust what happened to them, then that's, that could be the case. But you still have to deal with the fact that people won't have empathy or solidarity with you if you've just been trashing them for most of your time in the club.
Absolutely.
All right. So thank you for joining us. Again, I'm sorry that Rodney's not here to sign off, but let's put up this, and we always let everyone plug what they're working on. You're doing excellent work right now on Amazon workers and their continued union drives throughout the country, or workers' rights organizing that they're doing at fulfillment centers and warehouses, etc. And then also, obviously, you continue to build on that legacy of reporting that you did with Flint, Michigan, and the water crisis. So go ahead, plug anything you're working on, projects, where people can go to support Status Coup.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for having me. We are currently working on another Flint investigation. I like to underpromise and overdeliver, but I think this is going to be a major story. I don't have an ETA, but I'm thinking in a few weeks this will be out. It will show more about the cover up. We actually just launched a Substack, which we're going to have a lot more written stuff. Some of it, kind of opinions, some of it reporting. Yesterday, we broke a story showing Amazon like all out union busting assault with photos of the crazy propaganda messages they're posting in the Staten Island warehouse to deter workers from signing up for unions. Working on another Amazon investigation. So definitely check out our Substack. It's statuscoup.substack.com. You could become a free Substack subscriber. There's also paid options where you get a little bit extra content, but statuscoup.substack.com. And kind of going back to the what we talked about for a long time, we're really trying to grow our email list right now because honestly, with what YouTube's doing, that's a major way we could reach people. We do not like carpet bomb you every day with emails begging for money. We send maybe like 2 or 3 emails a week. So definitely, if you can, statuscoup.pub, pub/email. That's statuscoup.pub/email. And the last thing I'll say is, we are an in the field reporting unit. We're one of the only independent in the field reporting units. So if you have the means, we're a membership based. Obviously, we have our free live stream on YouTube. But if you like the kind of stories we're covering, definitely go to our website and become a member. statuscoup.com/join. We're actually do a monthly members call through Zoom, which we have coming up next week. So you get something as a member, in addition to a couple other behind the scenes content. So yeah, I just hit you with a few things, but Substack, email list, and if you have the means, you could become a member for $5 a month. statuscoup.com/join. And I really appreciate you having me on, Kevin. I've admired your work for a while.
Likewise, I think you have the right idea. It's an everyday struggle, but we do need to have this collaboration. So we'll Ronnie and I will continue to pay attention to the stuff that Status Coup is putting out, and maybe we wouldn't talk to you, but any of your reporters who are breaking stories, or if you break another story, we'll have you come on. We won't just have the same old conversation about censorship. We'll actually talk about what's being censored. So until then, we'll talk to you later. Thanks, Jordan.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you to all of our subscribers. We could not do this show without you. And if you are a subscriber, you're getting early access to every week's episode. And you also have access to premium content. We're up on rockfin.com/unauthorized if you would like to become a subscriber, if you would like to support our show and continue to make it possible for us to produce interviews like the one this week. And if you do not like Rockfin and prefer Patreon, we're up on patreon.com. You can find the Unauthorized Disclosure podcast there and become a patron. So thank you for supporting independent media. Thank you for tuning in to independent media, and we'll be back next week with another show.